I detest snow because it reminds me of the night my husband was taken from me. It started with a power outage, and then I heard Dan shouting some of his signature swear words from the next room, muffled only by the thin wall that separated us. On the days he was supposed to work from home, we usually stayed out of each other's way, so I was still in bed, mindlessly looking through a catalog when he came stomping down the corridor. For a man in his 30s, he certainly behaved like a toddler whenever something bothered him, but it made him easy to read, which I found myself appreciating. I reluctantly left the warm comfort of our bed and are onto my bare feet, but everything is okay, sweetie. I called out as I was looking around the floor for my slippers, but he kept yelling incoherently. I could hear him pacing outside the door until he finally joined me in the bedroom before I could ask him what was going on. He raised his finger at me and then gestured to the phone, which was still pressed to his ear, using those blue, partially bloodshot eyes. His tone went from raving man-child to professional in an instant, saying, "Yes, of course, I understand, sir. I will thank you, sir. Have a great weekend, sir." The call's distinctive sound caused Dan to relax once more. He wiped his face with his palm, let out a groan towards the ceiling, and then looked down at me. "Power's gone," he said, flicking the nearest light switch on and off as if I wouldn't have believed him otherwise. "Boss says that I'll have to finish my shift at the office if it doesn't come back in a few hours." I frowned and turned towards the frost-glazed window. It was late in the afternoon, and the snowstorm from yesterday wasn't showing any signs of letting off. The backyard was completely buried underneath a pale blanket of snow. Only the heads of a few lawn ornaments still broke the surface. Needless to say, I wasn't too keen on letting Dan go out there. We contacted the utility company for our area, though they acknowledged that there had indeed been an outage. They were unable to give us a time frame as to when it was going to be fixed. It was an expected response given the hazardous weather outside, but still no less discouraging. "At least we know it's not the wiring this time," my husband said, while digging through his section of our shared closet. Sweaters, scarves, jackets, and various other clothing items were being haphazard strewn about. Some of them I hadn't seen him wearing since our college days back when he used to take me skiing and forcing you to go out during a goddamn blizzard. A health violation or something. You're exaggerating. Besides, if I don't, they'll just wait a week and find an excuse to fire me anyway. Can't afford that, especially now. I thought, and glanced down. My swollen belly was poking out from underneath the loose shirt that I had slept in. I was 8 months pregnant at the time, being on maternity leave. I still got a paycheck at the end of each month, but I felt guilty that Dan was the only one actually working, especially since I've never been good housewife material. As he reached back and placed his large hand over my stomach, a familiar sense of ease washed over me. I grinned, knowing it was only a fleeting emotion, and clung to it till 8 p.m. It became clear that the power would not be restored. I moved some of my blankets to the living room and noticed that Dan had kindly stoked the fireplace for me. In any other situation, his presence in the dim ambient glow might have even been seen as a little alluring, but the prospect of his impending departure overshadowed any such feelings. "Be back after midnight. Call me if you need anything, but try not to waste your battery because who knows how long the outage is going to last," he said as he zipped up his jacket. "Yeah, I know, come here." We shared a quick kiss, and I waved him off in a show of feigned indifference, but in reality, the idea of being left alone in a dark, empty, and frigid house unnerved me. I had to hide the fact that I didn't want to give Dan any more reasons to be concerned about me. The warmth of the crackling fire comforted me, so I leaned closer to it and threw a blanket over my shoulders. I had mentally prepared myself for an evening of solitude and quiet when I heard his keys jingle from the small entry hall behind me. Imagine my surprise when Dan stormed back inside. I got up just in time to see his shadowy outline slamming the door shut and bracing against it. "Babe, I asked meekly, using my phone as an improvised flashlight and pointing it directly at. Only to be shocked by the horrified look that was emblazoned on his face. His mouth was hanging open and his eyes were practically protruding from their sockets. He was trembling and frozen in a silent scream, but it was clear that whatever was outside that door had traumatized and damaged him, not the cold. Dan didn't even blink as I hurried by him. It was like attempting to move a statue, and it wasn't made any easier by the fact that he weighed approximately 90 pounds more than me. "This isn't humorous, Daniel." I hadn't addressed him by his first name in years. It felt awkward to say it aloud, but I needed a way to let him know that he was really frightening me. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to get him to say anything, so I took what I thought was the most sensible course of action and called for assistance. I lightly tapped my palm against his scruffy cheek, hoping that it was all a foolish gesture. When I called 911, I made sure to put the call on speaker in the hopes that someone would hear me. The biggest mistake of my life was that instead of the familiar ringing tone, there was a high-pitched electronic shriek that I could only compare to quill whine. This voice would have somehow jolted my husband out of his reverie, or perhaps made him realize how seriously I was taking this. I felt as though my brain was boiling in its own juices, unable to process all the sequences and patterns that the signal was forcing upon me. Worst of all, some of the frequencies started to take shape in my head, forming into strands of alien code, but if they were so alien, why didn't I recognize some of them? The sound was amplified to an ear-popping squealing that kept getting louder. How could I have known that our entire existence, including our biology, history, accomplishments, and purpose, could be summed up in two perpendicular lines and a semicircle? Our birth and eventual extinction, only you and I are not you. In fact, you are not intended to be you, and even the idea of you is really a sign of a larger misunderstanding. I am you as much as you are me, so you are me. However, if I am you and you are me, then who or what are we doing in a desperate attempt to keep what little sanity I still have? I threw my phone on the ground and stomped over it until the signal vanished. Its cracked screen flickered under my heel's impact, and its artificial life was instantly extinguished. Once more, I cubed both sides of my pulsating skull and slumped against the wall nearest me, shattering a picture frame against the tiles. An emblematic depiction of my own mental disintegration. Warm tears trickled down my cheeks, but they weren't tears at all. They were more viscous, congealed, and tasted of copper blood. My husband wasn't with me anymore, of course. He was upstairs trying to find the gun his father had given us before we moved. I've always hated that thing, and it probably took him a while to remember which cupboard I had put it in. A few more seconds of fumbling with the safety, and then it was over. I didn't even notice the bang because the image of him lying face down with a hole in his head was projected against the back of my eyelids. I was supposed to see him dead, sprawled in the middle of our own bedroom, gray matter splattered against the tacky wallpaper, and blood seeping between the floorboards. I couldn't hold it against him. He was just the empty shell of a man who had seen the fundamental truth and tried to run away from it. Through red-tinted lenses, I examined my own hands, which were hands now down to the last wrinkle and blemish line. I placed them over the writhing growth inside my stomach, and it settled down. A loud, rhythmic heartbeat told me what I needed to do. I could no longer run from it. Instead, every step felt heavier than the last, or was it my consciousness weighing me down? The floor no longer felt solid. Instead, it melted and warped beneath me as if the house itself was trying to discourage me from leaving. I yelled for it to let me go, and it flinched, but only momentarily before continuing to ensnare me in its muck of willful ignorance. Behind me, Lauren, a dark mass, was crawling down a staircase that wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. It was bulbous black, covered in amorphous growths, and some of them used to pull itself towards me among its pool and inky tendrils, but it also wore a face that I had once loved, now stretched and twisted and contorted into grimaces that expressed an entire range of contradictory feelings. Perhaps neither it nor I understood what it was supposed to feel, but a pair of blue eyes remained constant in the middle of the turbulent abyss. I realized that none of this makes sense, but you must realize that this version of ourselves was never intended to look past the one-way mirror in which they live. They thrive between the material and the immaterial, carrying out their role as objective observers until the experiment that is humanity reaches its final stage. The three of us had unintentionally broken the protocol and were therefore considered compromised and contaminated, but perhaps it was all a test to see how we would respond when exposed to the void that our species had once been a part of. Danielle denied it and was no longer useful to them, but Max, my precious baby boy, and I faced it head-on and survived. What transpired after that is still a blur. When I try to visualize them, they seem to me to be both a single entity and an entire hive, as if individuality as a concept doesn't apply to them. I recall how cold the doorknob felt in my hand, as well as a blinding, all-encompassing radiance and an alternating number of silhouettes standing in front of it. Since they have every characteristic in the world at once and none at all in comparison to you and me, it is impossible to isolate even one of their qualities. They are alien in the most literal sense of the word. The next morning, as our neighbors were clearing snow off their porch, I was discovered sitting in the middle of the sidewalk, muttering and refusing to acknowledge anyone or anything. When my husband's remains were also found, it became clear that I had experienced a mental breakdown due to his suicide, but I had to give up some of my frostbitten toes. I eventually recovered, and a month later, as anticipated, I was able to safely deliver Max. No one believes my memory of what actually happened, so why bring it up now? As of today, it has been exactly 10 years since Dan left us, and the lights in my new apartment have been flickering for the past few hours. I'm afraid to use my phone, and I won't let them have our son either. Music.